Association. This is the 5th in our series of webinars featuring perspectives from diverse experts and visionary leaders who are driving innovation and developing powerful end-use markets in the field of tire recycling. As many of you know, tire recycling is a pillar of sustainability and economic growth in the U.S. While tires remain one of the most recycled products in the country, end-of-life tire generation continues to outpace our current markets. We believe that a powerful solution to this is the expansion of ELT markets, like tire-derived aggregates, molded and extruded products, and relevant to today's topic, rubber-modified asphalt. Expanding markets for recycled tire products not only leads to better ELT management, but also creates substantial economic and environmental benefits, including raw material savings, landfill diversion, and emission savings due to repurposing materials. In this series, we are addressing the benefits of ELT recycling and providing actionable steps and resources. We want to spur action among policymakers, DOT, municipal and county leaders, civil engineers, recyclers, and others across the broader tire value chain, so you can apply lessons learned and advance ELT management in your own markets. We believe a powerful solution is the expansion of rubber-modified asphalt. In our last session, we bundled up to discuss the Midwest and its freeze-thaw cycles. Today, we're heading south. We're going to focus more specifically on South Carolina, Georgia, and the broader Southeast, North Carolina, Virginia, Kentucky, Tennessee. This region presents a different set of opportunities, dealing with high heat climate resilience, heavy freight corridors, and the unique spirit of cross-state collaboration. We're also watching neighboring states like North Carolina closely, where recent policy shifts have triggered immediate private investment, proving that when the rules are clear, the market responds. Here with me today to dive into the strategies for RMA adoption in the South are Dr. Kimberly Lyons, asphalt material engineer at the South Carolina Department of Transportation. She's the former technical director of South Carolina Asphalt Pavement Association and the former captain of the Clemson Concrete Canoe Team. She offered a really nice presentation at the Clemson Global Tire Conference last year, which came to our attention. Allie Kelly, the executive director of the RMA, a nonprofit living laboratory for transportation innovation on I-85 in Georgia. She's a board member of the Tire Recycling Foundation, and the RMA co-produced the RMA State of Knowledge report released in May of 2021. Alexei Andrek, Senior Director of Business Development at Liberty Tire Recycling. He has over 10 years experience in the field, including in the asphalt and commercial pavement space. And lastly, we have James Lively, the Vice President of Sales and Marketing at Asphalt Plus, a leading provider of engineered crumb rubber additives. James has an MS from Southern Illinois University in 1994, and he's been involved in the markets in the Southeast, particularly Georgia, South Carolina, Virginia, and at the National Center for Asphalt Technology. So we have a great group of experts today. Please note that we plan to address audience questions at the end of the session as time permits, so that we'd ask you to use the Q&A feature in this webinar to submit your questions for the panel throughout the discussion. So let's get straight to it and examine the southern landscape and some collaborative approaches. I want to start by looking at the map. In other regions, we often see states operating in silos. However, the narrative in the South seems to have shifted a little bit toward collaboration. Dr. Lyons, let's start with you. South Carolina has been aggressive in updating specifications to allow for more sustainable materials. Can you walk us through the current landscape of RMA in South Carolina and how you are collaborating with neighboring states to ensure that these specs align?
Sure. In South Carolina, the utilization of a waste product as a replacement for a natural resource has great appeal to us. But the key to making GTR work is that it has to be properly engineered into the mix. And the DOT in South Carolina, we go all the way back to 1991 when the Intermodal Surface Transportation Efficiency Act was passed. We had a partnership with Clemson University and Dr. Sergi to really look at what it would take. So we're talking about 30 plus years in the making here in South Carolina. We looked at the dry process first in the 90s as a replacement for aggregate. That method wasn't best for us. Then we started looking at the wet process here. The mix performed very well. However, the added cost and equipment kind of made this method a little bit less than desirable for the cost-effective means to introduce the rubber into the mix. So the DOT started looking at the dry process. And as we were doing all this research, we didn't want to, invent the wheel. We started talking to our colleagues in the states that neighbor us. And Georgia has actually had some success with adding GTR using the dry process. So I used Georgia's research and we expanded on that to kind of get a foundation for what South Carolina needed to do. And using Georgia's specifications as well as research, we started by talking with our rubber suppliers, coordinating with them, our contractors who were willing to use it. And we ended up with not only a specification for ground tire rubber asphalt mixtures using the dry method, we wanted to push the limit, right? So South Carolina started using SMA stone matrix asphalt. And we were like, well, I wonder if we could use it in our SMA as well to further push the narrative. And we ended up using it as a what we kind of called a durability additive. So the contractor could use a rubber product in place of fibers as this durability additive. And we looked at, in the design method, we looked at APA, Hamburg, Ideal CT, and we started comparing our notes and looking at the life cycle analysis using this rubber in the mixes. And I went to my boss and I also said, well, we're having really good success and we're going to try it in these pilot projects, but can we fast track it? And NCAT was doing their call in 24 for us to sponsor a test section. So we took our current specs. We didn't allow NCAT to change anything to it because we have projects actively going on. And we ended up doing a rubber section in the SMA at NCAT. And really, I'm excited. I have limited data right now, but everything looks phenomenal. But really working with our neighboring states, looking at all the research that has been done has truly helped South Carolina push that I guess our start button and get to moving. So we now allow a wet process or a dry process here in South Carolina.
And do you also allow chip seal, rubberized chip seal, or do you have
a
spec to that? You do. So
we
you
have
the
a
full
SAMI
suite.
spec. Yeah, we have a full array of specifications that now allow rubber.
Thank you. That's an interesting journey, and I'm sure other states can sympathize with the long and winding road there. Allie, you sit right there on the I-85 corridor in Georgia with the RAY, that innovation demonstration highway that the RAY manages. It connects the whole region. The RAY acts as a proving ground for new and innovative technologies. How do you see the state of adoption of rubber modified asphalt in Georgia compared to your neighbors? And what role does a living lab like yours, like the RAY, play in giving DOTs the confidence to say yes?
Yeah, I'll just build on some of the comments around Georgia's use of rubber modified asphalt in a variety of mixes, SMA, as well as open graded friction course to address splash and spray on our highway system. Georgia DOT has a longstanding program, and similar to what Kimberly has achieved in South Carolina, a variety of specifications to leverage the use of upcycled tire rubber into pavement solutions. I think that our involvement in Georgia DOT's ongoing work and our involvement in national efforts like the Tire Recycling Foundation is really to help create broader exposure outside of the Southeast region and also across the Southeast region on the important work going on in states like Georgia and South Carolina. So that brings me to, some of our partners. Kim mentioned NCAT. I would also lift up testing that Georgia Southern University has ongoing with rubber modified asphalt. And then also the use of scrap tires and mechanical concrete with our rural roadway network that has not yet been paved. So there are a couple of different opportunities for innovation in action in the state of Georgia. Specific to the Ray Highway, we have a unique opportunity as a nonprofit organization to partner with Georgia DOT and Federal Highways Administration to produce infrastructure projects that are innovative or advanced or in any way addressing the safety of our roadways as well as the improved efficiency and operation of the system, and also to address going zero waste and recycling or upcycling opportunities in the transportation sector. So in total, we've worked with GDOT over the last 10 years on more than a dozen projects on that 18-mile corridor. Of course, rubber modified asphalt is an important piece of that portfolio, which we produced with Georgia DOT and its contractors in 2019. And the next step to all of this is using the proving ground, the monitoring and the data collection, and then the repetition of that success in partnership with other states. And partnership with other agencies, transportation agencies. So to that end, the RAY as an organization now partners across 25 state DOTs, as well as about a half dozen tollways and turnpike authorities. But we also have a network of local government partnerships that have allowed us to continue developing rubber modified asphalt as first projects. I try not to use the word pilot, but really getting first projects incorporated into regular use with these agencies. And then also picking up the conversation where agencies may have had their first introduction to rubber modified asphalt, 20, 30 years ago in the 1990s or 2000s, picking back up that conversation to say, there's more flexibility in the material. There's more flexibility in how the material gets introduced into the pavements. There's much more research and data collection that allows us to speak more confidently about co-benefits as well as the economics and the performance of these roadways. And we have a growing contractor community across the state of Georgia and the Southeast, but across the nation, who can speak to a new paradigm of rubber modified asphalt, which is, a cost-effective material that is easy to work with and that assures success of the project as delivered and the project's performance over time.
Thank you. James, what do you see the RMA market doing in the Southeast right now? You're muted.
Yeah, that might help if I unmute myself, John. Thank you for that. Well, I think we've, just kind of a little bit of a summary of the first two is, we did start historically with wet process, right? The reason I think that we're here today on these kinds of webinars trying to tout the successes that we've had is because we've been able to help the industry migrate from wet process, which included multiple tanks, agitators. You had to heat it. It was very messy. It plugged filters, it plugged pipes. And so really, I think the reason there's such a buzz right now going on is because a dry process whether in the Southeast or in the Midwest or any other place, the dry process lends itself to high levels of efficiency. The wet process certainly works very well. I'm certainly not here to say that wet process rubberized asphalt isn't effective. It is. It has great rutting and cracking characteristics. But I think that the improvement in the dry process, we've eliminated a lot of that. And one of the simple things with the dry process, it's very important to understand, and this is really for the contractors, but when you got a wet process tank, you have a limited window to be able to use that rubberized binder, right? And so if I got 72 hours, I've spent some pretty big bucks on that material. I got to use it. And if not, then you got to dispose of that. So you've paid for the material and never got a chance to use it. One of the primary benefits of using the dry process, and this sounds very trite, but it's a very on and off turnkey operation. You literally have one tank with PG 64. If you want a PG 70 comparable performance, we need to add 5%. If you want PG 76 comparable performance, we need to add 10%. You turn the system on, right? If it starts raining, you simply shut the system off. We're not pre-cooking or pre-digesting rubber and binder. Our materials are safe and dry in the unit that it's in. And you're not having to store these materials or disposing of them. And so, we're repurposing scrap tires to add economic value here. And we're also eliminating the efficiencies historically. And I really, truly feel that's why we're expanding throughout the country here, is because the dry process, and there's probably 9-10 million mixed tons of dry process rubber that's been laid with this process. So a significant amount of experience, and it's all been very successful experience. So John, we've been able to see, and I'd like to give the South Carolina DOT a lot of kudos. That collaboration, that happened early on, and I happened to be at one of the discussion places where they were at, but there was a lot of really good sharing of information. Every DOT is different. They got different DNA. But I think whenever they stretch out and talk to states around them and see what's happening there, try to incorporate that within their system, I think that's really where we get growth and opportunities like that.
Thank you. And to close out this section on the Southern landscape and collaborative approaches, Alexei, would you have anything to add?
Thanks, John. James did a phenomenal job of summing this up.
Okay.
The only thing that I would add to it is the shift in the mindset of the contractor. The wet process was so prohibitive because of costs of startup equipment, maintenance on that equipment, and replacing that equipment as it aged out. Now with the dry process, it's so simple for contractors to use it. Any contractor with a plant has the means and has the ability to do it. So, just mirroring everything that James said, but adding on that the shift there has been a monumental movement for us in this process.
Very good. So let's move on toward the economic and performance impacts, the business case for RMA in the South. In the Midwest, we talked about cracking and cold weather. In the South, the enemy is often heat, rutting, and heavy freight traffic. James, your technology focuses on that dry process, which has been a game changer for logistics. You just started getting into that with the no longer being required to have mixing tanks, blenders, and the like. From a technical standpoint, how does RMA, specifically the chemically engineered dry process rubber, handle the high pavement temperatures and heavy loads we see on southern interstates? And do we have data that shows it outperforms traditional mixes in resisting rutting? You're muted.
Well, at least I'm consistent on that, right?
We want to hear you.
Yeah, so the latter part of that, when we're talking about down south more having to deal with rutting, up north having to deal with cracking, whether it's rutting or cracking doesn't really matter, because the rubber does a phenomenal job at helping to improve the mix characteristics so that it's not susceptible to rutting and cracking. And one of the things that it does is those grains of crumb rubber absorb the lighter ends of the asphalt, thereby improving the stiffness of it. So that's going to improve the rutting characteristics of it. And if you think about, we're putting a -30 mesh material, which is like a micronized powder. So a pound of this material has about 5 million individual grains of rubber. Think of those grains of rubber as crack pinning agents, right? So a crack hits that rubber, it's certainly not going to tear through that rubber because it's too tenacious. So it's got to work its way around that rubber with all the irregular surfaces there. And what that means is it's mitigating the propagation of the crack there. And so again, whether it's rutting or cracking, it does a really good job with both of those. When we say traditional, I'm assuming just regular HMA, it performs significantly better than traditional HMA, but it also performs comparably to polymer modified asphalt, which is really kind of the coup de grace, if you will, for creating very durable roadways. But not just studies that we've done, and we've got many, many case studies, but I'll point to NCAT. The National Center for Asphalt Testing has 2 sections using our material. And these are their words, not mine, but they said that the dry process ECR outperformed the polymer on the first section, so much so they decided to extend it beyond the 10 million easels. I think we're about 13 million easels, and it showed cracking for the polymer right after 5 million, and ours was well after 8 million. So it shows that the rubber is phenomenal, not just when compared against traditional HMA mixes, but also polymer modified mixes as well. And we've got those case studies, John, available. I know we're going to have some kind of a little clearinghouse or something to post those. Yeah. I'm happy to share that information. It's independent. We've got ours, but there's independent data that, everybody knows what a great job that NCAT does. And so we've got summaries of that. That's their information that we're happy to share as well.
It's my understanding that rubber modified asphalt, a dry process RMA, is also less expensive than polymer modified asphalt in today's economics on the initial install.
Correct, John. And we kind of look at it as, there's a spread between the cost of the binders, PG64 and PG76. And without getting any specific details, the spread of that cost, right? Because we're going with a less expensive PG64 that we're adding the rubber to. But when you consider the cost of the PG64, the rubber, and the equipment, so there's a component in there that you include the cost of that, we're still on the everyday basis, John, saving anywhere from $2 to $4 per mixed ton, depending on what the local economics are. And then again, this isn't the economic argument, but for every 2 tons of asphalt that we lay, we're repurposing 1 full scrap tire. So that's kind of icing on the cake, if you will.
Right. Because pavement engineers are buying for pavement characteristics. It's nice to them that recycling is happening, but that's not what they're about. They are about pavement. And if this material doesn't perform as an excellent pavement, then this is not a sustainable market. Fortunately, it does. Alexi, I'd like to bring you in here. You have extensive experience on the industry side, actually producing these materials and seeing them in commercial assets like parking lots. When a private client looks at their paving budget, they're probably focused strictly on return on investment. From a plant operator's perspective, what's the business case for RMA in the private sector, and why are we seeing commercial facilities in Georgia and South Carolina choose RMA over a conventional mix?
Well, there's several factors that can weigh into the decision to produce RMA from a plant perspective. First of all, you have to look at the demand for the product, and that's where we come in. We're seeing a big shift right now in the private sector. They're looking for longer lasting pavements, and they have the willingness to pay for these additives. When a customer pulls up to a big box store and sees a third of the parking lot closed for paving and the other third closed for milling with maybe some cones here and there, they're going to reconsider that day, how important is this purchase? Or they're going to go down the street and drive right into a competitor, depending on what they're purchasing. Maintenance, whether it be planned or unplanned, can greatly diminish sales. Getting back to the plants, the contractors in states like Georgia, South Carolina, Kentucky, Tennessee that allow for rubber have made sizable investments in their equipment. typically a high-tech machine, or they already have some equipment that's in place. The more material that they can run through these machines that they purchased or rented sometimes, they will help offset the cost for the year. So it also adds a level of service to their customers when given the choice between contractor A and B. If contractor A gives you one option with the minimal level of effort, and B gives you additional options, maybe with full description of the features and benefits of their offerings, it makes sense to go with the contractor with that level of attention to detail. And then lastly, it really falls on us, the rubber suppliers, the organizations, to educate. We can't just hand off the responsibility. We can't just hope and pray that once we've done some education, we've got a spec in place, that they're going to take it and run with it. We really need to be engaged with the commercial end user, the DOT end user, the contractor laying the material, and the plants producing it, and really handhold until they're comfortable and ultimately can become a force multiplier for us.
And you've seen your product being applied at Lowe's, at Walmart, and at Discount Tire. And that's very exciting to me because I like to see the tire companies in the tire industry taking ownership of part of that end-of-life tire problem and using their own facilities to demonstrate and consume some of the end-of-life material. Pirelli has also led the way in Georgia with a couple of projects on Georgia's highways right in front of their plant. Allie, how is the RMA on the Ray performing for you?
It is performing perfectly as expected. I just wanted to build on James's comments around rutting and cracking. I want to take us out of the highway perspective and put us into a major metro area as transit buses and other vehicles in major metro areas become increasingly electric vehicle technology. Their weights are increasing, the weights of the vehicles are increasing, and particularly for EV transit, you have significant dwell time over a duty cycle of an EV transit bus and picking up and dropping off passengers. And so we're coming into an era of performance benefit and need in major metro areas as we're seeing the nature of mobility change, become more electric, more heavy, and potentially damaging to roadways. And for the first time, we're seeing metro areas across the Southeast look to the performance benefits that RMA produces in their roadway network to address some of that accelerated wear and tear of roadways. So I just wanted to, acknowledge that the highway utilization of rubber modified asphalt is well understood and the need is well understood, but we cannot ignore the emerging needs in markets like our major metro areas as we're seeing more electric vehicles and electric medium and heavy duty vehicles in particular add to the wear and tear on their roadways, and rubber modified asphalt is being sought after as a solution.
So we know that the engineering works. Let's take a look at the policies that allow it to happen. Dr. Lyons, from a DOT perspective, what's the biggest barrier to scaling this up? Is it contractor hesitation, or is it simply the time it takes to write new chapters in the book of evolution here? How did South Carolina overcome the initial friction?
The biggest barrier to scaling all of this up was making sure that we had all of our ducks in a row. You want to make sure that your research and planning matches your implementation. So to answer your question, John, it wasn't the contractor's hesitation. It was simply the time that it took to write new chapters in this book. It really starts as day one. You have to start coordinating with your contractors, your GTR suppliers. And you're going to coordinate with them from the beginning to the end. One example, and James is going to laugh at me about this, one example here in South Carolina, it sounds simple, was the approval of the rubber modified mix designs. And each supplier has their different way of adding this rubber during the mix design process. Well, we wanted it here in South Carolina added almost exactly as if you would when you're going to produce it. So we didn't want the rubber added to the binder during a mix design. So we got together with the suppliers and they all wrote their manuals on how these contractors could take the manuals and make their mix designs in the lab for us to approve before the project had way started. It really works to have a good working relationship with your material suppliers and your contractors. You want to get everyone in that room and you have to hear what their concerns and frustrations are too. What are the contractors worried about? What are the suppliers worried about? What is the state agency holder worried about? So that way you can all sit down and get a plan and move forward. Because as a state agency, I want the best pavement at the best price, right? And everybody has their own concerns in that round table. So in South Carolina, that's what we did. We sat down, we started working together, and in the lab, we designed our rubber modified mix designs. They look great. So then we pivoted to pilot projects. And as those, we got out in the field, we started working on those pilot projects. Well, then we would modify our special provisions or our specifications as we needed. And I just think that coordination is really what helps South Carolina. But you have to take a step back and give yourself time to, what is your chapter going to look like?
Very good. Allie, following up on that, policy sparks investment. What are the key drivers that you're seeing right now in Georgia? Is it purely an engineering decision or are there legislative mandates? And critically, how do we take a success on the RMA and scale that to a federal level?
Yeah, I mean, I would actually start with, legislative mandates in other states that we're watching closely. States like Connecticut with extended producer responsibility legislation that, has not been well supported. It's one thing to pass a policy, another thing to execute a policy. And so, we work with Connecticut DOT as partners, and we're watching that state's environment closely because you want to be very careful that the policy landscape does not upset the market landscape. An alternative to that is to look at a state like Colorado, where they have enacted policy that is really focused on circular economy and economic markets, and being a point of leadership for innovation in circularity and circular markets. So we've got a couple of different ongoing experiments, if you will, policy laboratories. In Georgia, as in most of the Southeast, we don't really rely on mandates, and we don't take kindly to other people's mandates. As Dr. Lyon said, we like to see the market work, best product for best price. And I think, we have the benefit in the Southeast of a robust supply chain and a robust market of private sector partners who can come in and really, really act on procurements and really act on P3 opportunities. So that's one of our benefits. That's one of our superpowers, is the supply chain. We also have specifications in Georgia and South Carolina that can be, just as Kimberly looked to Georgia, we have southern states that can look to South Carolina and Georgia's specifications. So we have a kind of a roadmap for specifications even though we don't have policy, we have all of these benefits in the Southeast that our neighbors can take advantage of. And I think finally, it's just the reality of the cost. James did a really good job of breaking down, where the cost efficiencies come from. I think maybe what hasn't been said is, over the life cycle of the pavement, you also can tap into reduced savings from the ongoing maintenance because you're reducing your cracking and you're reducing your rutting. So your maintenance over the life of the pavement is reduced. And then, of course, your life cycle perspective on the project. We're not fully capturing that yet as state DOTs because we are, really focused on, low bid to get the project done. But I think we're starting to see some interest in opening the aperture and taking more of a life cycle cost approach when we're evaluating the cost of projects and when we're evaluating the performance as part of the benefits from the initial investment. The last thing that I'll say is just to tag on to something James said earlier. Look, this country's producing, around about 300 million tires a year. That is a reliable supply chain of material for rubber modified asphalt. When you look over at the polymer modified market, it's a lot more volatile in that market because ultimately it gets down to where oil and gas industries globally and in this country, what kind of price volatility is being experienced by that bigger market. And so, I just think that the ever-present supply chain and the cost and pricing consistency that creates around the rubber modified asphalt market assures more pricing certainty around rubber modified asphalt. I hope eventually, we will be reducing the number of scrap tires that this country is producing. But an investment in end markets is really key right now. And the competitiveness of those end markets are driven by the confidence and consistency in the supply chain of scrap tire material to be upcycled into these projects.
Thank you. I want to pivot to the regulatory environment. We've seen some legislative momentum in places like North Carolina, where a particular bill, SB 706, it was a solid waste and environmental cleanup measure that focused on giving counties more support to deal with end-of-life tires and related waste management needs. We're seeing legislative momentum in places like North Carolina, where this bill was passed, and you operate across a number of states. When you see clear policy support or legislative certainty, how does that change the way a producer or plant operator invests in their business?
Well, a little bit more on SB 706, just for some clarity for the group. It returns
Yes.
about 30% of the tire disposal fee back to the North Carolina Tire Program. And then of those new funds, 75% will go back to the counties, and up to 15 will go towards incentivizing new end markets, such as rubber modified asphalt. It is very similar to S171 in South Carolina, where the main focus of that bill was shoring up the state's waste tire fund, which primarily supports county cleanup operations. So when it comes to new products or innovation, we must always remember that we're dealing with the asphalt plants. And I've talked about it before, but the contractors are faced with new technologies every day where people to attempt to inject more experimental or recycled materials into their plants. So really the mutual respect has to go both ways. We must respect their time, their resources, their equipment. Even with a policy change, the acceptance must still come at the plant level, as they're the ones that are actually producing the mix for commercial projects, DOTs, anywhere that asphalt is going. So the asphalt producers are very gracious enough to put our materials through their plants and test it in their labs. Strictly focusing on policy change can cause any momentum to slow if we don't have their approval. The best way for states to get support, state-to-state communication, finding someone at the DOT level that is a supporter of the product, like Dr. Lyons, will go a long way with contractors and other DOTs. Producers with multi-state locations will also play a big role. It's always a benefit when you've got a contractor that can help in another state that has already touched and played with the material and paved with it. And then another big difference maker is the state asphalt pavement associations. They're key to helping navigate local producers, state DOT. Once we have that buy-in from the contractors with the help of with the state asphalt pavement associations, we can really get these products pushed, and the contractors will support us, as we know, as we've gone through all this process with them.
James, you work with contractors every day. What's the one thing that they're most afraid of when they hear rubber modified asphalt? And how does the modern dry process alleviate that fear?
Well, John, it probably goes back to some of the discourse earlier on this webinar when talking about the wet process. I think a lot of people, unless they're using the dry process, they probably have, nightmares about the historical challenges of the wet process there. And I really think that, whether it's the individual technology provider or, organizations like yours, John, we have to continue to get the word out and educate the people. The one thing I find very fascinating about this industry, and Alexi was talking about earlier, everybody's trying to run different things through the asphalt drum, right? But they're very receptive to that. I mean, I almost look at them as, they're like these scientists that are in labs tinkering with things. And so they can certainly, they're very intelligent. They can absolutely figure out processes and such. But I think the biggest thing they think about when they hear that is, oh my gosh, it's going to be a great challenge with all these extra tanks. We need all these extra procedures in place, limited application windows, as I had talked about earlier. I think that's probably what most of them think about. And then, of course, the dry process really does simplify and eliminate that. And the other thing to think about is I don't really want to call the dry process new. As I said earlier, we've got 9 million mixed tons. NCAT's got multiple test sections on it. There's a lot of material laid down from the dry process. So I think that fear that's going to be there, if they're not aware of it, it's up to all of us to make sure we do a better job of educating the industry.
Thank you, James. We can't ignore the fact that we have a massive environmental story here. When rubber modified asphalt is utilized, it replaces virgin materials, it recycles and utilizes existing materials. It also has noise reduction, skid resistance, spray resistance, heat island effect, and other types of benefits. So let's talk about that opportunity and the operational reality of going green. Alexei, you've worked with the dry process extensively. When you're managing plant operations, is incorporating these recycled materials a disruption, or has it become a seamless part of the production cycle?
Well, funny enough, James and I just co-presented on this very topic down here in South Carolina at the Asphalt Pavement Association less than an hour ago. We actually came from that right to this. So it's a hot topic that is obviously on the front of everybody's mind. As far as additives go, rubber is very much on the easy side of incorporation. There is more and more additives popping up, like we mentioned before, and a good amount of these additives utilize proprietary equipment for dosing. Rubber is not perfect. It's not, it is, but it is very easy. The rubber industry utilizes commonly used cellulose fiber blower machines as our main source of dosing equipment. We can get contractors to also explore equipment that they already have at their plants, like lime silos and spare wrap and ras bins. There are no plant sourced additives that can magically appear in the asphalt mixes. To some degree, they need to be fed into the asphalt plant. These pieces of equipment I mentioned are all tied into the control tower at the plant. No running down to check on the machine's performance and accuracy. At the end of the day, each plant has the full capacity to get a readout which can track anywhere from 15 seconds up to a minute with each dose of rubber that has been blown into the mix. As far as green, what is more green than recycling tires? The question I ask most commercial customers is, what happens to all your tires your company consumes? Very few, if any, know the answer, but they can easily see the path that I'm headed down. Commercial companies have hundreds, if not thousands, of trucks on the road at any given moment. It is one of the easily trackable numbers for them to trace. More and more companies are posting about their sustainability efforts using smart mix technology, where we pre-swell the rubber, very similar to what the wet process does, will be maximum efficiency in the mix. We are able to not only recycle these tires, we dramatically extend the life of the pavement, which is a tremendous piece of technology that is easy to explain as they run it up the flagpole.
Wonderful. James, true circularity implies that we can recycle that pavement again at the end of its useful life. I know the FHWA has said that rubberized pavements can be recycled. Can you point to a project where an existing rubber modified road was milled up and then recycled back into a new mix as recycled asphalt pavement?
Yeah. So John, as we began this process a few months ago, we were talking about some various topics and such, and I'd reached out to several of our current contractors and clients, and it's absolutely been done, John. If you look in the literature, California has been using wet process rubber for 2 to 3 decades. And so there's some articles that are 20 years old that talk about that
Yeah.
there. I think we need to update those case studies, John. In South Georgia, most of the interstate work that was laid there, most of that had rubber in it. That was laid down 15, 17 years ago. Since then, those roadways have absolutely been milled up. It contained rubber in the wrap, and that material has since been used. But one of the challenges with that is nobody was really focusing on that to study, look at everything, put it under a microscope, make sure that we're dialing everything in. So I think that it's an existing research gap where we need to focus on that and better understand that. I don't see anything, John, and the people that I've just spoken to anecdotally, and then those articles are saying it's going to be a problem. I think what we just need to do is do a better job of putting some focus on a couple of projects, benchmarking some things, and then showing how the outcome of that has not negatively impacted the operation or the durability of the roadway. So I think it's an existing research area where we need some more research, John, to plug that hole there.
So we could buttress that.
Yes, sir.
Ellie, at the Ray, I know you have a goal of zero waste highways. And how important is RMA to achieving that goal? And moreover, can you walk us through how the Ray is using data-driven approaches, particularly GIS, mapping and thermal imaging to validate climate solutions like rubber modified asphalt, and how that ties into your broader mission? And you can share screen if you have a slide or two or more to share with us.
Great. Are y'all able to see this presentation?
Yes.
Just a couple of slides to take you through some of our data-driven work. This regards a November 2025 first project of RMA for Atlanta DOT. Atlanta DOT is resurfacing roadway networks throughout the greater Atlanta area in preparation for the FIFA World Cup. And Atlanta DOT had never utilized rubber modified asphalt before November of 2025. The Ray worked with Atlanta DOT to develop a strategy for identifying not just one pilot project, but a series of projects that Atlanta DOT intends to develop a permanent specification that would prioritize most, if not all, future resurfacing projects in the Atlanta area performed by Atlanta DOT to be done with rubber modified asphalt. We have an innovative use for these first projects, not just for the first exercise of rubber modified asphalt for a metropolitan DOT like Atlanta, but also to study the beneficial impact of rubber modified asphalt on the urban heat island effect, which Atlanta suffers greatly from during our prolonged summer months. So the RAI's role in this work has been to work with the GIS or the geospatial team at Atlanta DOT to come up with a methodology for assessing the road resurfacing pipeline at the Atlanta DOT for projects that could be interventions, infrastructure interventions in urban heat island experience of Atlanta, but also sections of roadway resurfacing that could be studied to collect more data on rubber modified asphalt and the urban heat island effect. This is just a summary of some research that the RAI participated in with USTMA and the University of Missouri back in 2021. We produced a compendium of known knowns, so collected data, the best-in-class research from the country, and we found in reviewing that data and producing that state of knowledge on rubber modified asphalt 5 years ago that we could expect tire tread emissions reductions, reduced carbon emissions as a result of paving with rubber modified asphalt, particularly in more moderate temperatures of paving, also reduced roadway noise, and potentially an intervention to urban heat island, which had not yet been explored as an addition to the existing toolbox. The existing toolbox for interventions looks like, tree canopy, applications of white paint to tap into the albedo effect. And we really wanted to be a part of the science and collect more data on rubber modified asphalt paving projects and the study of urban heat island. But first we had to identify which projects would be appropriate for this study in the Atlanta DOT area. So you're looking at our initial project list. You can see Fulton County is highlighted in the map. You can see the interstate network as it courses through Fulton County, which is the county seat of the city of Atlanta, and the number associated with the projects that we were reviewing for resurfacing for rubber modified asphalt, particularly for the study of UHI. This is just a snapshot of some of the spatial data that our GIS team took into account with the assistance of Atlanta DOT's GIS team, everything from population to vegetative cover. And then we also developed with Atlanta DOT and some reference to existing literature, a social economic vulnerability index. Basically, we wanted to understand where geographically the road resurfacing projects were impacting communities who lived adjacent to those projects, accounting for the lack of tree canopy, accounting for the industrial areas where there's not a lot of skyscrapers or tall buildings to provide shading. And the socioeconomic vulnerability index is really taking into account the vulnerability of the populations, those that are young in age or advanced in age, the economic access of those communities to air conditioning during the summer, which all of this feeds into their vulnerability as a population to urban heat island, and also feeds into the public health concerns that come along with UHI. So here's just a snapshot of some of the geospatial data that we took into account for Fulton County in producing a road pavement prioritization for producing Atlanta DOT's set of first RMA projects to study for UHI. And this work continues into this new year. The state of Georgia established a tire grant program to use some of the fee income from the purchase of new tires, and no pun intended, but recycle that into financial assistance for local governments in both rural and urban areas to support their first rubber modified asphalt projects. So since the first paving project that Atlanta DOT successfully produced with a contractor in November, Atlanta DOT has been supported to win a tire grant from the Georgia Environmental Protection Division. We're now in the planning for that project to occur in the next 4 to 6 weeks. And then we'll continue down the list of projects that'll be funded through the state DOT's local maintenance and improvement grant program, which Atlanta DOT will receive receive that funding and continue to produce rubber modified asphalt projects. And the study of this, of the UHI impact by rubber modified asphalt roads is being conducted by the nation's foremost expert on urban heat island, and that is Dr. Marshall Shepard, who is a professor at the University of Georgia.
Thank you, Allie. State of the art right there. We've got just a few minutes left, so let's go through a quick lightning round of questions, and we'll start with Dr. Lyons. If you could give one piece of advice to a state materials engineer in a state that has not yet tried rubber modified asphalt, what would that be?
It would be to trust the engineering data and the experience of other states that have implemented RMA. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. Just use the data and experience of others as a starting point and tweak it as you need for your state.
Excellent. Thank you, particularly where the climate is very similar.
Yeah.
James, could you give us a pain point warning? Where have you seen a project or a spec conversation stumble, and what's one thing that a first-time RMA state should avoid doing?
Yeah, well, the first thing I want to do is give a little bit of credit to the DOTs and kind of the structure that Kimmy is laying out there. They're bombarded on a regular basis with all kinds of advances in technologies and new technologies. So I don't envy them for having to ferret through all those and being able to identify what they think is best given their local resources. So I think the DOTs are fairly open-minded to looking at new things. I think one of the pain points that I've seen where a project or a spec has stumbled is it's fairly new information. As an example, to a state DOT, and I'll actually use Georgia 20 years ago or 15 years ago. If you run our rubberized asphalt through the Masker test, that was one of the criteria for the polymer modified binder, right? Rubberized modified asphalt cannot pass the Masker test. So they can look at that and say, well, you don't pass the Masker test. That's the testing apparatus we got to run everything through. So sorry, until or unless you can pass the test, we're not going to have a chance to look at that. Well, Georgia didn't allow that to stop them. They put some material down on the roadway and they watched it. They observed it. They cored it. They tested it. They got some experience. They got a comfort feel for that, right? So now what they do is they waive that test for RMA. They've been doing this for about 20 years. They're arguably the most successful RMA DOT program in the country, right? And they did that because they were willing to kind of step outside of that comfort zone and say, well, I know you don't pass that test, but look how long this stuff lasts when we put it out on the roadway. So again, it's the pioneers, the kind of the adopters who are willing to look outside those guardrails and maybe change the system a little bit to allow it. I think you look at Georgia, I don't think anybody would disagree that that was a really, really intelligent decision for them to take the shackles off of that testing apparatus and kind of remove that one requirement. And now look at the success stories we have in Georgia, which is great for the taxpayer, it's great for the contractor, and it's great for the DOT as well.
Thank you. Alexi, for producers or facility managers in neighboring states who feel like they're starting at zero, how do they generate some initial interest in RMA?
Well, it really comes down to communication. First, communicating what the wants and needs are. Second, the rubber community needs to give them the tools to make an impact. If it's a top-down approach, they need to be well armed with the benefits of using rubber and the longevity that it gives you in your pavement. And if it's a bottom-up approach, we need to arm them with the sustainability benefits to help the decision makers achieve their goals. And there really is the ultimate element, which is the contractor. We need to make sure that both sides are comfortable with the installation of the asphalt rubber. It needs to be the same as we discussed before by making the contractors comfortable when they support the DOTs. We really have to have that communication and make sure that each party understands the benefits of it and the expectations of it so that nobody is let down at the end of the day.
Thanks, Alexi. And Allie, last question to you today. Georgia's been a pioneer in validating the dry process to meet high-performance specs, and it doesn't require contractors to install expensive blending tanks or continuous mix equipment. As we look at the roadmap for other states, how crucial was that low barrier to entry for contractors to get GDOT to scale up adoption?
Yeah, I mean, the efficiencies and feasibility of producing rubber modified asphalt with the dry mix because the equipment issues are reduced is a major win for a state like Georgia or South Carolina, and could be a major win for all other states. I really think that the scaling potential is exponential. My final thought on this is that rarely do we get an opportunity in the advanced infrastructure space and transportation to talk about an infrastructure innovation that was really begun 50 years ago, but which continues to evolve and be innovated at an accelerated pace today. So we have the confidence of having rubber modified asphalt in roadways for a long period of time. But like many other things in our society right now, the advancement, the efficiencies, and the innovation is happening at light speed. And I think it just offers state DOTs and other agencies the opportunity to go with confidence, looking at important references like South Carolina, Georgia, and others, and also just trust the data. As Dr. Lyon said, we have a revised state of knowledge coming out. Actually, Dr. Bill Butler at the University of Missouri and USTMA will be producing that, I believe, this year. So we'll have another round of data to look at in addition to the 2021 state of knowledge. Trust the data, trust the longevity, but also recognize the advancements and the innovations that have happened in a really short period of time over the last few years, like the dry process.
I want to thank all of our panelists, Ali, Alexi, Dr. Lyons, and James, for sharing your expertise today. The takeaway is clear. In the South, RMA is proving to be a robust solution for its unique climate challenges. We're seeing some real momentum from South Carolina's spec updates to North Carolina's legislative wins, creating a powerful corridor of innovation. There's been substantial and important work as it relates to growing and expanding ELT markets, and it's important to have a forum where we can share the information and collaboration happening in one space together, because effective collaboration is the only way we're going to reach 100% tire circularity. As a reminder to our attendees, please look for our post-webinar toolkit in your inbox in the coming days. It will include data, insights, and a recording of this session. We'll also answer all the questions received during the webinar. We'll also share a survey link in the chat now. I think, Amelia, if you can do that, share the survey link in the chat now, because we value your feedback. If any of our audience has specific technical questions that were not addressed today, or you're seeking additional technical expertise, please contact us directly, and we'll do our best to connect you with a subject matter expert who can assist you further. This was very successfully completed in Maine just recently, where we had some stakeholders contact us, and we were able to provide them with draft specifications and other information that really helped move their ball forward. I hope you'll join us for our next webinar in this market series, which will take place later this month at 2 o'clock on Tuesday, February 24th. In our next webinar, we're driving into one of the financial engines of the tire recycling industry, grant funding. And we'll explore how federal and state dollars are currently driving advancements in TDA, RMA, and molded products. You'll walk away knowing not just where the funding is, but how to navigate the application process and use those funds to build scalable, sustainable infrastructure. Please mark your calendars for the Tire Recycling Foundation's 2026 Tire Recycling Conference to be held May 12th to 14th in Denver, Colorado. Registration is now open. This is the place to meet the experts you heard today and in our previous webinars face to face. We plan to continue these important discussions and provide further valuable information and insights in Denver, and we encourage your participation. If you have any other questions for the TRF, USTMA, or especially any of our panelists, please reach out to Stephanie Mull at smull@tirerecyclingfoundation.org. Thank you so much for watching. Thanks again to our panelists, and I hope everyone has a great afternoon. Bye for today.
I just realized